You see, people often believe they are living their own lives, but in reality, most are fighting unconsciously, like warriors wielding weapons who never stop to ask why they must fight. Each passing day takes the shape of a hidden battle against the pressure to be stronger, against the expectations others hang on your shoulders, against the judgments that make the mind shrink, and against the deep-seated fear that always demands control. Yet, the real battlefield has never been out in the world. It lies within each person's soul. There, the most dangerous enemy is none other than the weak, chaotic, and unacknowledged part within us. And once this is understood, the concept of victory changes completely. The greatest victory is not overcoming others, but overcoming oneself, overcoming the darkness that once bound us in silence and turned us into losers on the stage of our own lives. When delving deeper into that inner battlefield, the first signs begin to appear, silent but powerful signals foretelling an inner transformation. The most prominent is a sense of weariness toward meaningless external battles. The fiery arguments on social media, the petty rivalries, the moments when people try to claim the right at all costs. All the things that once made the world vibrant suddenly become heavy, empty, lifeless. The verbal battles that once spiked adrenaline now only create a feeling like watching a crowd gesticulating in a play you no longer believe is real. You no longer see value in arguing until your face turns red, no longer have interest in efforts to assert yourself through words, logic, or displays. External fame, once a measure of success for many, gradually loses its appeal. You begin to question the true meaning of climbing social ladders, as everything starts to appear more like masks than essence. The noise of the world gossip, struggles, judgments, comparisons, instead of sparking excitement as before, now causes fatigue. That world is like a noisy fair, where everyone tries to shout louder than the next, but no one truly listens. Amid that noise you feel an invisible pull drawing you toward silence, as if the mind is reclaiming its breath after a long stretch of being swept into chaos. At the same time, a sense of detachment from the crowd begins to spark. Not arrogant detachment, not a desire to isolate yourself to prove something, but a natural detachment that occurs when you clearly see the nature of those social battles that the crowd still eagerly rushes into. The struggles to display morality, to prove viewpoints, to secure the right position in others' eyes gradually reveal themselves as unconscious rituals where people fight not for truth, but for fear of being looked down upon. The values the crowd clings to, recognition, success measured by preset standards, the need to be better than the next person, no longer have the power to control you. They are like stage lights, dazzling, attractive, but hollow and extinguished as soon as the play ends. And when those values lose their power, you begin to feel a strange emptiness that is also liberating. Empty, because what once controlled you is no longer effective. Liberating, because you are no longer forced to fight in battles that aren't yours. This is not a sign of weakness. On the contrary, it is the first step in reclaiming energy from false fronts to prepare for the real war. The only war that matters, the war with the deepest part of yourself. Amid those silent changes, a special moment emerges, a breaking point in perception, where the veil that has covered the world's essence suddenly slips down, revealing a truth impossible to ignore. That is when you realize that most social conflicts people engage in with full passion are merely mental defense rituals, thin armors used to shield the fear of being seen completely. People do not truly fight for ideals, but because they fear that if they stop fighting, their fragile ego will be exposed. In that new light, every argument you once thought important begins to lose its weight. Arguments are just efforts to hide insecurity, judgments are shields to protect self-image, and anger is a wordless confession that beneath the tough exterior is an unacknowledged weakness. When this perspective takes root in the mind, the battlefield you once thought vast suddenly shrinks. External wars become petty, superficial, even laughable. The fierce verbal clashes, the confrontations to assert oneself, the collective outrages that seem intense, turn out to be repeating cycles of unprocessed fear. You begin to see clearly that most conflicts have nothing to do with truth or justice, but are merely ego defense mechanisms wrapped in noble forms to make them easier to swallow. That is when a different silence arises within you, an inner retreat that allows you to observe without being drawn in. From that retreat, every enemy that once made you angry or anxious looks entirely different. They are not opponents you must destroy, but people fighting their own versions of fear, just as you once did. And when you see this, you can no longer view them as the cause of your suffering or failure. Seeking an external enemy becomes meaningless, because you have clearly seen the real adversary, the chaos, doubt, hurt, and fear, still lying deep within yourself. From this moment, you are no longer enchanted by the battles the crowd sees as life or death. You no longer want to dive into debates to claim the right, no longer feel the need to prove yourself by dismantling others' views, no longer feel pulled into moral fights, just to rationalize shared insecurities. All those things gradually appear like plays where the audience is so immersed, they don't realize it's just acting. You see the stage, the backdrop, the actors trying to embody the ego they think they must portray. That view does not make you arrogant, it makes you awake. It marks the most important shift in a warrior's journey, the shift from participant in war to one who sees the whole picture. The participant is swept up in every sword strike, every verbal attack, every explosive emotional moment. The one who sees the whole picture is different. They see the entire structure of the battle, the unconscious motives driving every move, the hidden wounds behind every aggressive act. When you reach this point, you begin to understand that winning or losing in the crowd's battles has nothing to do with your true value. You realize that your strength lies not in counterattacking, but in seeing through, not in beating others, but in no longer being pulled into unreal battles. This realization paves the way for the next step, entering the real war, the inner war, where victory brings no applause, but brings a freedom the crowd can never touch. And when that awareness has taken root, the next change occurs almost irreversibly. Once you understand the true nature of the world, you can never go back to fighting in the old way. The battles that once excited or angered you no longer hold the power to draw you into their vortex. You cannot force yourself to believe in values previously seen as essential, fame being right, position in the crowd's eyes, or recognition that once felt like mental oxygen. They begin to appear as they truly are, temporary structures people build to compensate for inner emptiness. When this is clear, every old rivalry becomes meaningless, not because you become indifferent, but because you have seen through the deepest motive operating them. You see the insecurity behind every effort to prove oneself, the fear of being looked down upon behind every judgmental voice, the hidden weakness in every angry act. Once those things are exposed, you cannot pretend not to know. Like the moment light suddenly shines into a dark room, darkness cannot reclaim its power, and you cannot go back to pretending you don't see what has appeared before your eyes. The awakened person no longer fits into ego-based battles because the ego no longer has the strength to trick them into joining. Outrage no longer seduces, arguments no longer create a sense of victory, and crowd recognition becomes as bland as its own shadow. Another thing happens quietly. The mind begins to crave a higher battlefield, a place where victory is no longer measured by dominating others, but by the degree to which you master yourself. That battlefield is not noisy, has no cheering audience, no visible enemy to conveniently blame. It is the battlefield of will, of inner honesty, of the ability to face darkness without retreating. When entering this phase, you realize that returning to old wars is like picking up armor that has become too small. It no longer fits and can no longer protect you as it once did. The goals that once motivated now seem too shallow, too predictable, too limited. You no longer want to win in others' eyes. You want to win in the space only you know, the space between you and yourself. It is here that the journey's pivotal turn is established. Abandoning the false battlefield is not an act of leaving the world, but an act of affirming that you are ready for a different form of strength. Strength the crowd cannot give you, but the inner battlefield can. When that awareness has taken shape, the reason the awakened leave false wars becomes as clear as firelight in the dark. Society operates countless battles that lack the essence of real fighting, merely repeating plays, endless debates, where each person tries to elevate their ego by diminishing others, flaunting success, as if human value can be measured by numbers or surface symbols, performing exaggerated emotions to create the impression that intense feelings mean depth, forming factions to find safety in numbers and avoid facing personal uncertainty, competing for status as if social position can replace the true meaning of life. Those battles do not exist out of necessity, but out of the crowd's need to maintain the illusion they are accustomed to living in. Everyone contributes energy to keep the curtain from falling, because if the illusion vanishes, everyone must face the part they have long avoided. But when an individual stops believing in that illusion, detachment happens almost immediately. No need for declarations, no rebellion, no arguments. That person simply becomes incompatible, like a body that has outgrown its old shell. Those still clinging to the illusion will feel their presence unsettling, incomprehensible, even threatening, because they no longer participate in the common game. When someone no longer sees those battles as real, they cannot continue playing a role in the play. The crowd is still deeply immersed in, and withdrawal becomes as natural as breathing. Withdrawal is not escape. It is an act of protecting energy, truth, and mental health. When you know clearly that those wars are not real, you cannot continue expending life force on them. The mind needs space to look deeply, the soul needs quiet to recover, and the will needs clean ground to take root. Leaving false wars is like leaving a stuffy room to return to real air. The stuffiness does not disappear because the room changes, but because you step out of it. And the freedom you feel does not come from the world, but from no longer tying yourself to unconscious plays. The awakened do not accept participating in the crowd's fighting structure, not because they weaken or become timid, but because they understand a profound truth. Fighting the wrong enemy is the surest way to lose yourself. If you pour strength into battles to protect image, to win words, to prove something to others, then the energy for the real inner war will be drained. Every false battle is a subtle trap. It makes you think you are advancing, while in reality you are just running in circles in the ego's maze. And when you see that, the awakened cannot continue participating. They choose to withdraw, to direct all strength to where it is more deserving. the inner battlefield, where the real enemy resides, where real victory can be achieved, and the only place in life where no one can fight for you. Stepping out of false battles, the warrior enters a completely different land, the land of inner retreat, where external noise no longer has the power to distract, and all attention is pulled back to the human center. This space takes the shape of a profound solitude, not solitude from being cut off from the world, but chosen solitude, like closing the final door between oneself and the chaotic waves. The crowd continues to create. In this silence, the real war begins to reveal itself, layer by layer. Darkness appears first, dense, rough, and honest to the point of being impossible to ignore. It is the collection of emotions you once pushed away, memories once suppressed, reactive habits you once believed were inherent. All of them return as if they had been waiting for you your entire life. The rejected parts, the personality traits you didn't want to acknowledge, condemned desires, covered weaknesses, begin to step out of the shadows and demand recognition. Following them are old wounds, no longer buried under the rush of daily life. They surface piece by piece, burning hot and thick with raw emotion. You are forced to see everything without any cushioning shield. Primitive fear also reveals itself. Fear of failure, fear of not being enough, fear of being left behind, fear of becoming invisible, fear of being seen for who you truly are. There is no escape in this phase. Everything must be handled from within, because there is no one left to hide behind, no noise to use as an excuse, no role to lean on. This is a war zone with no hiding places. It is in that raw contact that a new form of strength is created. Will, once fragmented by surface confrontations, begins to flow continuously again, sharp like a sword blade forged in fire at the right moment. The ego, built from layers of defense, is peeled away layer by layer like onion skin, not to hurt you, but to return you to your original core. All pretense is burned away. People-pleasing habits, image obsessions, the need for recognition, all cannot survive in the solitary environment where only truth is allowed to exist. And in the ashes of those defensive layers, the true self begins to emerge, quieter but stronger, less verbal but deeper, no longer weighed down by others' expectations. The entire process is like undergoing the harshest training camp a warrior could face, but also the only school where true victory can form. Here there are no witnesses, no prizes, no boundary between winning and losing, only evolution occurring in silence, one breath at a time, one realization at a time. The warrior is forged by absolute honesty with themselves, by the ability to stand firm before the darkness without turning to flee. And it is in this unseen place that the first and most important victory begins to take shape. Inner victory, victory over chaos, victory over the urge to return to old safe zones. From that victory, a new person is reborn, strong not because of thick armor, but because nothing in the darkness frightens them anymore. After that challenging retreat phase, the warrior steps back into the world with a completely different mental appearance, as if the ashes of the old ego have revealed a new, sturdier and clearer core. Calmness becomes a natural temperament, not silence to appear strong, but the stable state of someone who has seen every storm within themselves and still stands upright. Sharpness also appears, but not the kind used to gain an edge over others. It is the ability to see through hidden motives behind behavior, to see both fear and need in every human confrontation, and thus no longer be drawn into useless battles. The mind no longer fluctuates before praise or attack. The triggers that once easily ignited emotions now pass like wind over a lake's surface. No longer a need to seek crowd recognition, no longer worry about proving oneself, no longer fear of judgment. All those states become light because true value is no longer tied to the outside, but built from inner strength. Victory, for the warrior at this stage, no longer lies in dominating others with logic, action, or status. Victory lies in mastering the self, consistency with what one knows is right, and calm before things that once caused inner storms. A person who masters themselves is no longer directed by the crowd, no longer pulled by society into trending waves, no longer bound by imposed standards. They stand in inner freedom, freedom that needs no one else's recognition to exist, needs no noise to feel valuable, needs no collective to confirm direction. Solitude is no longer a threat, but a familiar territory where they return to renew energy and nurture depth. Lack of praise no longer shakes them, for they do not seek others' eyes to know they are on the right path. This is the type of person Nietzsche called the self-creator, people who forge their own values instead of borrowing from tradition, who set their own standards instead of chasing the crowds, who carve their own path instead of walking pre-made roads. In them, strength is not the result of victory over the world, but the consequence of victory over oneself, a victory no one sees, no one applauds, but which builds a lasting foundation for their entire life. And from that state, a silent summons begins to ring from deep within the being, the call of the real battlefield, where there is no cheering, no visible enemy, no stage lights, only becoming awaiting those brave enough to step forward. The inner warrior has one sole mission: to enter the battlefield of spiritual maturity, where every step demands absolute honesty with oneself. Here, there is no room for chasing external noise. Every echo of society, praise, blame, expectations, rivalry, becomes interference, and all strength must be directed toward one goal: forging will with the deepest self. The true victor is not the one cheered, not the one with many supporters, but the one who does not allow the world to decide who they must be. That person does not wait for society to assign them a role. They choose their own nature, determine their own path, take responsibility for every step without needing any consensus from the crowd. To reach that point, the journey demands more than determination. It demands a rare courage to shed the false battles that once consumed their life, to dare retreat into silence instead of chasing noise just to forget inner emptiness, to dare face darkness without retreating, to dare look at parts that once frightened them, to dare rebirth by destroying outdated old shells, and finally, to dare return to the world in an unconquerable stance, not because anyone granted power, but because they created it themselves. This is not a path for souls wanting ease. This is the path for those ready to lay down everything that once gave them false safety. It is the path of those unafraid to lose support, unafraid to stand alone, unafraid to be misunderstood, for they know crowd consensus has never been a measure of truth. At the final stage of this journey, the call becomes clear as light. Breaking through thick fog, step away from the crowd where people still fight unconsciously. Leave battles, not yours, battles that drain the soul without bringing growth. Vanish from pretense, from roles that make you forget who you are, and re-emerge as the victor of yourself, not loudly, not boasting, not needing witnesses, but with strength. Anyone who sees recognizes. From that position, all external judgments become meaningless, for no one can touch your center. All comparisons become out of place, for you no longer share the crowd's orbit. All invitations to meaningless wars pass you like wind over stone. Once inner victory is established, it becomes an asset no one can take, not circumstances, not public opinion, not failure, not time. That victory is the only thing that cannot be stolen, the only thing that cannot be shaken, the only thing that follows you to life's end, like a spear aimed straight at truth. And it is at this point that you become victor, the victor not because you conquered the world, but because you conquered yourself, and that is always the greatest victory a human can achieve. If you find what I share valuable, please subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming philosophical journeys. See you in the next part of the awakening and becoming your own victor.